Hello and welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is American Ben, and I know it's been a while since I posted a video. Truth is, I made a bit of a mistake. I got involved in a land war in Asia, and that took me out of commission for a bit. But now I'm back, and I'm doing a video on one of my favorite films of all time. One which plays a foundational role in my life. As a young elf, I thought I was going to be a swashbuckling crusader clad in black and donning a mask to hide behind it, a visage worthy of my very own Buttercup. Well, as it turns out, I'm a YouTuber, and it's within the internet realm that I do my dueling. And the mask I wear is one wrought of emotional scars and insecurities rather than lace, leather, or some simple textile of man. Aww. Oh, I mock my own pain, but whatever, I'm no one of consequence. Speaking of which, The Princess Bride just hit its 35th anniversary mark, and as such, I've seen posts about it and articles about it percolating around the interwebs of late. Long story short, Inigo Montoya in real life is basically the nicest dude ever, and it is he to which we shall turn our attentions today. Specifically, I want to take a deeper look at the man behind the mustache and prove him to be a much more complicated character than the film's outward frivolity might allow. You know the basic rundown of the film. The help falls in love with the beautiful maiden. Wesley and Buttercup are head over heels for each other, but life calls upon the smitten couple, sending Wesley to the high seas where he's shipwrecked and lost adrift for years, while Buttercup is betrothed to the Prince of Florin, a snaky, hubristic, but rather effete man aptly named Humperdinck. Wesley thus must regain his footing and rush to save his true love. Along the way, he's joined by the rather ungentle Jolly Giant Fezzik and the semi-dim-witted chivalrous fencer Inigo, both who help him in his quest to rescue Buttercup. Now, would you ask anyone who's seen The Princess Bride, surely they'll tell you that it's a cherubic strain replete with gallant heroes selflessly bound to subverting the will of iniquitous fiends whom have little chance of standing against the forces of good. And indeed, I would not contest this claim. The Princess Bride is family-friendly fare, and as a child, I myself found it worth the weekly watch, for it well galvanized my boyish spirit whilst leaving me no worse for the wear, and certainly sans any disturbance to my dreams. That said, my older cousin took care of the latter by forcing me to sit through Event Horizon and the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre in one night. Not fun. But I digress. Happy, family-friendly film is The Princess Bride. And yet, if we do some work to infer from the situations that occur in the movie and the dialogue therein, we find the Kingdom of Florin to be rife with suffering. Hence,
life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something.
Florin knows of darker things than its most famous story intends to convey outwardly. The Princess Bride is a fairy tale, or something resembling one. Fairy tales are, of course, happy stories of magic and wonder set in imaginary lands where goodness abounds to triumph o'er the few great ills that here and there rise to put the good to misery. However, fairy tales are, like any story, snapshots of the world in which they take place. Fairy tales are not worlds themselves or entire histories of everything that ever happened in a given world. No, they're selected series of related occurrences that conclude in happily ever afters. That doesn't, however, mean that the end of a certain fairy tale is the end of its world's existence, and nor is its beginning the start of it. After all, at the end of The Princess Bride, the evil Humperdinck lives on, and our heroes have become fugitives of the crown. Perhaps just days later, they're captured and executed for their crimes. Yes, it's a macabre thought to be sure, but the point is that stories pick and choose their details. The same is true for the larger world, what we call the real one, We don't see everything that everyone does or experiences. Andre the Giant, Fezzik's player, was known to be a kind-hearted man throughout his life, and yet little did the world see of his health struggles, as he was an abnormally giant man due to a disease of the pituitary gland known as acromegaly. He was also known to have a drinking problem, none of which was an overt facet of the jubilant, congenial character he portrayed to the world. We only saw of him a snapshot. A fairy tale, then, can perhaps be defined as a little glimpse at the good in life and in the world. Such stories choose only the sweetest details to display. And so we come to the subject of our video, the Spanish swordsman Inigo Montoya. Based on our experience of Inigo in The Princess Bride, it seems obvious that we deem him an honorable and honest man. Yet, if we're to think more seriously about his character, we must contend with the fact that when we meet him, he's working for Vizzini, a Sicilian criminal who's been employed by Humperdinck to kidnap Buttercup, a part of the Rotten Prince's larger plan to wed and kill her in order to frame the neighboring kingdom of Gilder for her slaying, so that Humperdinck can declare war on and invade Gilder with the public's consent. The point is, the noble Inigo is himself doing dirty deeds, and this calls into question his honor and morality, traits with which we so reflexively presume him to be endowed. And yet, at the same time, he's almost entirely heroic in the movie as far as his actions are concerned. So, who is Inigo really? What kind of man is he? After all, perhaps the Inigo, and Fezzik for that matter, who we see in the film is just a snapshot of a much more complicated man. Perhaps in a bit wider frame of his life, we'd be horrified by some of his transgressions. And then again, provided an even wider one, maybe we'd ultimately conclude that he is indeed the hero we think him to be. After all, we're told that prior to the events in the film, Vizzini finds him curled up in a bottle. He was a bit of a sot until entering into the diminutive Sicilian's employ.
Never forget this! When I found you, you were so slobbering drunk you couldn't buy brandy!
As for Fezzik's point of introduction to Vizzini, well, at the time, he was in Greenland. In other words, he was also drunk. Now, I'm not trying to cast aspersions at all drunkards here, or all Greenlanders for that matter. I've met some really friendly alcoholics in my time. Greenlanders, no comment. But still, the Inigo we see in The Princess Bride is maybe a bit more well-assembled than the one of the years preceding. Maybe back then he was much more of a reprobate. Now, we do get a slight glimpse into the man he was, though, and he seems more listless and indolent when under the enchantment of magic juice than anything else, really, but he straightens up pretty quickly. By the way, for some reason, that soup is an image that's branded into my mind beyond all other visuals from the film. Additionally, the Inigo we meet in the film is a bit tired. He's been searching for Rugen for a long time to no avail. He's not the sprightly buck he once was, and with that, I think we've run into him when he's more emotionally mature than he was in adolescence or early adulthood.
You see, I cannot find him. It's been 20 years now. I started to lose confidence. I just work for Vicina to pay the bills.
This should only make us more curious as to what we've missed by showing up on scene in Inigo's life so late. Perhaps at the time he meets Vizzini, he hasn't the maturity and perspective to engender empathy within himself, and thus, this more juvenile version of himself is indeed ripe for Vizzini's pickings and much more callous. That said, in sum, it's mostly impossible to whittle down Inigo's being to a concise and sure-footed statement, given the limited lens through which we view him. Is he, in essence, a valorous charitarian who's wended his way into unfortunate company, or is he instead an insidious charmer whose urbane countenance and disposition belie subcutaneous venom? Remember, Inigo threatens to kill the man in black, aka Wesley, when the two men first come face to face.
But I do not think you would accept my help, since I am only waiting around to kill you.
That does put a damper on our relationship.
He makes such a threat as if he's no stranger to murder, and thus he's charming and honorable indeed, but has no hesitation about killing other human beings. I really do wonder, had Inigo ever killed anyone prior to his definitive duel with Count Tyrone Rugen, the man who slew his father when Inigo was a boy? Is Inigo a killer? Or just a talker? In the lighthearted vein of the film, we're sort of made to believe that while the trio of Vizzini, Fezzik, and Inigo are up to no good, they are sort of just foolish clowns. And yet, it's so hard to gauge exactly what the film wants us to make of their blithe allusions to misdeeds and murder. They seem to be jokers, but then again, Wesley really does kill Vizzini. Well, sort of, with a bit of a false choice. That Vizzini actually suffers the ultimate fate of death at the hands of Wesley says to us maybe he is a much more sinister character than it would appear, and is maybe deserving of the fate he's offered. The Princess Bride is masterful in this way. It never betrays its cheery tone or the blissful air of its setting, and yet it constantly alludes to the darker nature of its world and characters therein. The result is that for those like myself who are game to obnoxiously overthink everything, the film is cause for true perplexity. We never really figure out if Inigo intends to kill Wesley upon their initial encounter. Why does Inigo help Wesley up the cliffside rather than wait out the Man in Black's inevitable plummet to his doom? Is it ego that compels Inigo to aid his foe? Does he want to defeat him by the blade on even footing, or does he truly, even if subconsciously, desire to salvage Wesley from his coming fall? We'll never know, unfortunately, because the Man in Black bests him mano a mano, right against right, and abandons the Spaniard on the cliff to an unexpected but probably welcome siesta. I should add as an aside that I do not believe Wesley would have defeated an impassioned Inigo, a la he of the ilk who duels with Rugen later on in the movie. But once again, I digress. From context, I think it's fair to presume, for we are somewhat privy to it directly, that Inigo has lived a tortured existence up to the point we meet him in the film. As I mentioned before, his father was slain by the right hand of the king, the six-fingered one that is, Count Rugen, a man of unhinged malice who fancies himself a bit of a contortionist, though it's other bodies than his own which he prefers to make writhe. As the story goes, Inigo Montoya, the aforementioned father of Inigo, was a legendary swordsmith who, upon completion of a blade commissioned by Rugen, was offered a paltry sum for his worthy craft by the good count himself, far below the agreed-to asking price. And when Domingo refused to part with the blade for said sum, Rugen summarily parted him from life by blade through the heart. Well, at least he died doing what he loved most. Sort of. Anyway, following his father's murder, Inigo swears himself to vengeance and goes on to live his life obsessed with a single purpose: to take the life of Count Rugen for the one Rugen took from him. And it's due to Inigo's incessant fixation on vengeance that he's neglected to lead a prosperous or even well-adjusted life. I mean, this is a man who knows word for word the pronouncement he'll make when he finally confronts his father's killer.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Vengeance is all he is, all he thinks about, all he awakens for, all he plans for, trains for. Inigo is so deluded in this pursuit that he speaks of it as if it's a venture he is joined in with his father.
Well, you don't know where he is?
Don't bother me with trifles. After 20 years, at last my father's soul will be at peace. There will be blood tonight!
He does not realize that actually, he's alone. His father is dead, and Inigo is the one suffering in this madness for 20 years.
Father, I have failed you for 20 years. Now our misery can end.
Whatever religious beliefs may be inspiring Inigo's interaction with his father's soul aside, he cannot come to realize that his father is not suffering, not anymore at least. There is no our misery. The misery is Inigo's alone, and it's one he leans into and exacerbates. One may even suppose that the way in which Inigo goes about his world in constant conversation with his dead father allows him to be less lonely than he would be otherwise, and also share some of his pain with an imaginary being so he doesn't have to absorb it all himself.
Sorry, Father. I tried.
By constructing a spectral version of his father, in a way, remains alive. And thus, Inigo doesn't ever fully confront his father's death or deal with the heavy emotions such entails. So too does the presence of Inigo's fictive father allow him to shirk the onus placed upon him to find new companions in life and make his own family. To be fair, fatherless boys often amount to less than stellar men, albeit most wayward sons are set less on vengeance as they are on the general practice of delinquency. Inigo is yet a unique character among Lost Boys, as he does in no way seem to project the sinister traits assumed of a villain, and rather on the contrary, he espouses, as we've touched on already, a philosophy centered on chivalrous behavior and inclined towards honor. And yet still, he's clearly guilty of engaging in sordid activities for coin. There's a glaring cognitive dissonance to his thinking, whereby he is the most gentlemanly of men, and yet still a criminal. I thus conclude two things. First, Inigo Montoya spends enough time in his child's life to instill in his boy values that persist long after the former's demise. Inigo is maybe heavily conflicted between being his father's son and an emotionally damaged man who, reeling, becomes erratic and prone to misbehavior. The dueling scars on his face are but trifling pricks to the cuts laying deeper within. And the way Inigo reconciles this dichotomy between superficial and spiritual scars, and between pious son and unstable swain, is by becoming his father's avenger. Someone who can thus act on his anger in the name of honor, a la his dutiful pursuit of vengeance. He, in this way, gives himself an excuse to remain derelict and neglect to get his life together. Additionally, by obsessing over the pursuit of his father's murderer, as in by devoting all of his emotional capacity and energy to finding Rugen, he's able to avoid dealing with his father's death altogether. He's consumed by a singular focus, and thus remains in denial about his father's absence, even if he speaks of it in certain ways. And how convenient is it that he's remained fixed on this endeavor for 2 decades? I'm not going to accuse Inigo of deliberately failing to track down Rugen in all that time, but certainly such a lofty aim is likely to keep him chasing his man for an indefinite amount of time. I think Inigo truly does want to get his hands on Rugen, but I also think he's comfortable remaining consumed by this singular purpose, and more directly by his madness. Sobriety, both in terms of seeding the bottle and in terms of clear sight, is a thought far more menacing than delusion to our Spaniard. Alright, now it's time to show my hand a bit. I, in no way, believe that Inigo is some depraved individual. He is the very foil of Rugen, even if the wrath that sparks his machinations for vengeance rivals that of Rugen's for inflicting pain. I see in him a man brimming with compassion and averse to causing harm. He is the charming swashbuckler we want him to be, albeit no soul at rest. He's a finely suffered man, and an acutely tragic character who spent away his youth beset with anger and dedicated to but a single task. However, there's some bit of beauty and even some utility as well born of this obsession. For no thing is so simple as to bring about only negative consequences for the collective, or even for the individual. Rather, life is pain. And from pain, the suffering man brings about progress. Is Inigo's story not a fundamental one of man? As a boy, he experiences an obscene tragedy, but withstands it, bearing inestimable anger, a rage that drives him to devote the entirety of his energy to a single profane purpose. And for this purpose, he hones a single skill, swordsmanship, and he masters it.
I dedicated my life to the study of fencing. So the next time we meet, I will not fail.
Mastery is rarely wrought by complacency. Rather, it's melded through a bittersweet oleo of pleasure and pain. The pain that is caused to the art and the pleasure derived from the practice of the art itself. Though most of our fathers were not pierced through the heart with a rapier, I think we can quite easily relate to Inigo's impassioned practice of the blade and his unremitting pursuit of a goal. Whatever cracks lie in man that drive we to gird our loins and hone a craft so that we may say among man can we survive him, these cuts that run deepest, if they do not defeat us, then they make us who we are bound to become. And whether that becoming leads us to a destination without woe should matter not, for the product of our labors is a good due the entire species, sometimes at the expense of the individual. Mankind needs warriors, heroes, and what it costs the warrior to be forged is less the concern than the need of a standing army when the walls of Florin are breached by the savages in Gilder. Damn cannibals. Whether Inigo's suffering is worth his 20 years or not, it is his determination, his madness, that advances the good, the forces of the good, more than does any other character in The Princess Bride, including Wesley. Inigo's tenacity is what, in this case, brings about our happily ever after. It's not true love which does so. It's the indefatigable Spaniard and his bloodlust for vengeance that sees the man in black rescued from the pit of despair. It's Inigo's unquitting pleas to Miracle Max that awakens Wesley from almost death. And it is behind his deft sword that Humperdinck's castle is breached and his men brought to heel. Yes, Wesley designs the deception which gets the trio of him, Fezzik, and Inigo through the gates, and the giant's role is certainly central to the scheme as well. But without Inigo, I'm inclined to believe that all would be lost. Wesley would die, Buttercup would marry the prince, and live a life basking in limitless riches and endless pampering. But anyways, the tale has indeed more than a single hero. Heroism is surely not a zero-sum affair among individuals at least. But Inigo is the only character in the film who, if we remove, the credits roll before a happy ending is attained. Probably somewhere right around when Wesley and Buttercup emerge from the fire swamp. And then the Wonder Years never happen. I would thus call Inigo the hero of Florin. Especially as while Wesley fights for love, Inigo is inspired to his quest through a web of inner turmoil, inclusive of rage, sadness, and despair. And I must imagine that his story is not unlike so many others given to the people of Florin. The Florinese people, or Florinians, or Florindians, whatever, are collective victims of the monarchy's tyranny, and Inigo is the one among the masses who dares to storm the castle gates and see to it that the prince knows his subjects' pain. Well, he's at least the only one to do so successfully. There's probably been a lot of aspirant people's champions who tried to enter the castle and fell the prince before him, but were subsequently parted with their heads or some other body part or three. That said, Inigo's success is no coincidence. His determination is an incredible mover because it breeds patience. The chances of finding the six-fingered man are slim, and should he be able to locate him, promising opportunities to seize a man in the King's Guard would surely be rare if almost non-existent. But with 20 years of obsessing, persisting, and with a lifetime of focus, when the door opens that one time, upset victories are possible. This is why every moment, painful and otherwise, in Inigo's life, the 20 years of suffering, is necessary so that in one single moment, perhaps a number of hours, an untouchable prince can be overcome and the people may triumph. I suppose then there is a good in madness. Though that's not to say that Inigo sees it this way. He just misses his dad. And with no one to guide him through adolescence after his father's murder, he's never able to confront his emotions or prevent himself from flailing through 20 years of maladaptive coping. He's a uniquely tragic hero. He succeeds in his quest, and we, the audience, do get a happily ever after. But I'm not sure he does. Having now achieved vengeance, his 20 years of obsession must abruptly end. Inigo has constructed his entire identity around finding the man who killed his father and defeating him. And with that task complete, he's all of a sudden without an identity, a direction, or anywhere to go at all.
You know, it's very strange. I have been in the revenge business so long. Now that it's over, I don't know what to do with the rest of my life.
That said, he is still a relatively young man upon the conclusion of the film's events, and with age will perhaps come to build a more robust and fulfilling identity. Also, he has some really marketable skills, so the resume should look good. Anyway, yes, I'm not quite going to say that Inigo is the true hero of The Princess Bride, but he is the most dynamic one, and the reason his character is probably the most memorable in the film is not only because he's funny and charming and responsible for a number of unforgettable quips that continue to live on in memes everywhere today. It's also because there's something about his struggle that's relatable, something about his pain that's real. And most of all, there's something about his passion and obsession that we identify with, romanticize, and which utterly captivates us.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Anyways, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed my take on Inigo Montoya. Really excited to hear what you have to say in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a big thumbs up. Remember to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a damn thing. For now, my name is American Ben, and I'll catch you next time. Generation Films, peace.